but I want to get to this rancher issue and give you my current take on this. Current meaning the situation could become fluid again. The Washington Compost actually had a pretty decent outline of what has transpired over the years, and I'm going to fill in the gaps as well. But I hope you'll take a moment to listen to this, because you hear people saying, well, this guy Bundy owns all this land, owes all this money, won't get off the land. Okay, I get that, but let's get some facts straight. Number one, it is federal land. That is not in dispute. Number two, there are different kinds of federal land. There are different kinds of federal land. And 20 or so years ago, the federal government decided that this federal land would be protected federal land. Well, they can't just come out and say it's protected federal land. So what was the basis of them claiming this was protected federal land? The desert tortoise, which you've heard about. They said it's an endangered species. It's threatened. So the government unilaterally claimed, the federal government is, that hundreds of thousands of acres would be set aside within the federal land area as a conservation area, thereby eliminating, on the spot, ranching, mining, farming, off-road driving, everything. Everything had to go, including livestock grazing, cattle. Clive Bundy's family had been grazing there since 1877, and he said, no. You step in here and you claim that this is conservation area after more than 100 years because of the desert tortoise, I'll lose everything. Well, Clive Bundy was the last rancher standing. All the others were shut down. They took some kind of money agreement. All the miners were thrown out. Everything ended, except for Clive Bundy and a couple hundred head of cattle. So the Bureau of Land Management, which, by the way, didn't even exist at the time his family began grazing on federal lands, started to fine him. And they fined him over and over and over and over again. And they revoked his grazing permit. And Bundy was very furious about this. And he refused to go in for a new grazing permit. And he refused to pay the fines. So the matter went to federal court. The BLM, among others, had their federal lawyers from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the Interior Department, from the Justice Department, and Bundy represented himself. What had been legal grazing since 1877 was now declared by the BLM as illegal. And as you would anticipate, in 1998, a federal district court and then the Ninth Circuit, based in San Francisco, ruled that Bundy must remove his cattle. Now let's dial it up without all the other details, some of minor consequence. April 2012. After several, thoughts about how to get Bundy off the land and get his cattle, BLM abandons the plan to remove the cattle. Well, in steps the Center for Biological Diversity. This is important. Bookmark that mentally. They threatened to sue the BLM, to force the BLM to remove Bundy's cattle. The following month, the BLM then asks a federal court to issue an injunction against Bundy to stop him from grazing. So the BLM was going to give up 2 years ago. But a radical left-wing environmental group threaten to take them to court and force their hand, at which point they probably would win, since the federal government created all this legal foundation and had court orders now to do it. And they were going to back off, but this leftist environmental group said, no, don't back off. Get rid of the cattle. August 2013, a federal court gives Bundy 45 days to remove his cattle. He won't remove his cattle. Then this April, as you know, BLM claims Bundy owes over $1 million in fees. Bundy says, no, I don't owe over $1 million in fees. If anything, I owe $300,000. But you people keep harassing me, and you get these fees to help manage the land, and you're not managing the land. And you know what transpired the last week or so, and BLM pulls back, but says it isn't over. Now I want to step back and talk to you as somebody who was as I pointed out last week, the number 2 lawyer at the Department of Interior for a brief period under President Ronald Reagan. The tortoise isn't threatened anymore. The tortoise isn't threatened anymore. It's been a huge success. So the underlying basis, or even pretext, if you will, for labeling hundreds of thousands of acres of federal land as conservation land ceases to exist. It's federal land. But what kind of federal land is it? Why is it still characterized as conservation land, now that the basis for calling it conservation land doesn't exist anymore? If it ever did, since apparently the cattle and the tortoise get along perfectly fine over time, and have. Last time I checked, cattle don't eat tortoises, or vice versa. Every other rancher was squeezed out. Every other human activity, for the most part, was squeezed out in these hundreds of thousands of acres, but Bundy won't move. Now let's step back and take a look at this more broadly. There's this push in this country through the Interior Department, the EPA, even through NOAA, variety of other departments and agencies and offices. There's a push in this country to nationalize private property. There's a push in this country to move human beings off of these large swaths of land, whomever remains, even a Bundy. Ask commercial fishermen what's happening to them. They're being put out of business by the federal government. Ask coal miners what's happening to them. They're being put out of business by the federal government. Ask steel workers what's happening to them. Ask men and women, union, non-union, who wish to build these pipelines from Canada or even across the country, what's happening to them. Ask the farmers in Central Valley, California, what's happening to them. Ladies and gentlemen, this environmental movement is a Marxist movement. At the top and within the bureaucracy. They are trying to shut down industries that are crucial to our form of, to our lifestyle, and they are trying to, to limit productivity and expansion. And they control the reins of government. This is why so many Americans are sympathetic for Clive Bundy. They see that he's been caught in a bureaucratic and legal quagmire. So to simply say what he's doing is illegal, that's not enough. How did this come to pass? Why, after all this time of grazing on this land, Did they stop him? Did they seek to put him out of business and all the rest of them? This isn't simply a matter of following a court order, although I would recommend you do. It's not that. It's bigger than that. This is an assault on our way of life. You may look at Clyde Bundy. The vast majority of us have no idea where he even lives, other than watching TV. We've never been there. The vast majority of us, not all of you listening, I get that, but the vast majority of us have never grown anything like farmers. We've never had to raise livestock. We've never had to drive trucks to bring produce or livestock to the grocery store, where it's conveniently wrapped and weighed and you take it home and use it and cook it and so forth. There's all kinds of things that go on to putting food on your table. There's all kinds of things that go on when you flick that switch and the light comes on. There's all kinds of things that go on when you say, you know what, I'm not going to eat meat. I only eat fish. Somebody has to catch it and process it and preserve it and transport it and present it. And this entire system is under assault. It's under attack through federal regulations, through federal agencies and federal departments. And they're being pushed and prodded by organizations on the left, by politicians on the left, and by bureaucrats who've weaseled their way into the federal bureaucracy to use regulations to attack these enterprises, to attack these individuals, to attack this way of life. That's why people are furious. Meanwhile, if you want to build a massive solar energy farm, and by the way, that's what's required, a massive amount of land in the middle of the desert where the tortoise is, or if you want to build wind turbines, and you need a hell of a lot of them to make a difference, even mass transit cutting through a desert, you're going to have a hell of a lot easier time. So my question is this to the BLM. Now that we know the desert tortoise is no longer endangered, why don't you stop treating this land as conservation land and let the ranchers back on and their cattle and everybody else? Because the original basis for the classification doesn't even exist anymore. But they won't do it. No. Instead, we'll be told, the rule of law, baby. I'm not against the rule of law, but I'm also not in favor of the abuse of power. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
So why is this land in Nevada, which the ranchers have used for a couple of generations, why is it still conservation land? Since the desert tortoise is just fine. Why don't they repeal the designation so Mr. Bundy and other ranchers can use the federal land as they have, well, for what? Since the 1800s. See, that'll never happen because the environmental radical leftists, that is the Marxists, will object to it. Once government's in control, government's always in control. So the pretext is gone. And let me also say this. If you're a citizen and you're sitting back and you're seeing what's happening to your land, you have a puddle on your land, you know, this isn't just some guy in the middle of nowhere, ladies and gentlemen. This is now affecting suburbs and outer burbs. You have a puddle on your land and now that's navigable waters? Really? Under the Clean Water Act? Seriously? Oh, yes. With no right of judicial review. That was the EPA's response until the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. There's all kinds of abuses of the citizen, of property rights, of lifestyles that are going on in this country. All kinds. By this ubiquitous federal Leviathan. And how is it that all these issues, all these obstacles just melt away when you advance a liberal agenda? A pro-green, pro-red agenda. We need these massive wind turbines. Well, there goes the bald eagle family. Oh, well, who cares? We need miles and miles of desert in Nevada for solar panels. What of the tortoise then? Well, then screw the tortoise. Right? Because human beings, in the calculation of the green movement, a.k.a. the old red movement, are of little consequence. The rule of law. And that's quite hilarious coming from this president and his administration and the likes of Harry Reid. The rule of law? Really? Really? You mean the Constitution, Mr. President? Is that what you're talking about? This president is still violating the Constitution and still intends to, with the support of his party, with the support of Harry Reid and the rest of them. Now, as I said, those of you who think this is just some crazy guy out in the middle of nowhere, how does this affect you? Let me tell you how it affects you. It's not just about land use. It's about human use. It's not just about controlling development. It's about controlling you. They chased out every single rancher off those hundreds of thousands of conservation land based on the tortoise, which is no longer threatened, except one. They tried to bankrupt him. They tried to run up his legal bills. They've run up his fines. They've calculated his grazing fees. They've got one court order after another. And so when people simply say, well, it's the law, he needs to abide by the law. Well, yes, he needs to abide by the law, and the federal government needs to abide by its limitations. Now, here's the biggest question. Why the hell does the federal government control 87% of the state of Nevada? Why the hell does the federal government control 25 to 30% of the continental United States? I'm not even including Alaska or Hawaii. Why? Why should that be? Well, Mark, conservation. They have no idea what's going on most of these properties. When I was Deputy Solicitor of Interior for a short period under President Reagan, the general rule was don't harass these people. They're trying to eke out a living. They've been there forever. Don't crush them. Treat them as neighbors. Treat them with respect. Don't look for excuses to put them out of business. This is the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. You know what happens to private property owners who happen to have inherited property that are in the middle of park areas, that are surrounded by parkland? You know how many of those people have their property condemned? Trust me, we don't know the vast majority of what's going on. And people, they go into the Fox News studio, good people. Or they go into the MSNBC studio, or they go into the CNN studio, and they sit there and they start commenting on, or any of the nightly news, what's going on in a place of the world they've never been to. Same thing happens on the border. Same thing happens. We have anarchy on the border, and yet there the federal government has complete control if it wants it. Complete control over the border. There we're saying, send the troops. Send law enforcement. Stop what's going on. No, we're going into Nevada, and we're going to surround this guy's ranch. Forget about him. Take care of the border. No. So where the federal government has power, it's unequivocal. To protect our southern border. To secure our southern border. It refuses to do it. For political purposes. And when it comes to the tortoise, when it comes to the bald eagle, when it comes to any quote-unquote endangered species, the solar panels come first. The wind turbines come first. In other words, the radical left Marxist ideology comes first. And it upsets me to no end to watch these patriotic men and women in federal law enforcement having to carry out the will of the hardcore left. And those of you who trash these men and women, we have a big disagreement. But that said, it does pain me to watch how they're abused through these processes, because they are. This is one of the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we always come back to the same point. Limited government, a constitutional federal system. We always come back to the same point, for which I'm increasingly smeared, by the way. But that's my problem, not yours. And that is the Convention of the States. We need to act constitutionally, civilly, lawfully, if you will, through the constitutional process left to us by the framers. Well, let me finish this hour by underscoring that there are a lot of fake conservatives out there, a lot of phony conservatives out there who attack our Constitution, specifically Article 5, even more specifically, the Convention of the States process. Just electing more Republicans like Eric Cantor and John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, and all the rest will not resolve our fundamental problem. Our fundamental problem is it took us 100 years to get where we are today, and it's going to take time to get us back on course, and simply electing more federal Republicans isn't going to fix it. It's not. George Mason knew it. James Madison, in the end, he knew it too. We say we believe in federalism, then let's believe in it. We don't need all the state legislatures. By God, some of them are the worst places on the face of the earth. But there are many good ones. And they have a constitutional obligation under the federal Constitution to rescue this nation from tyranny. That's the civil, lawful way, the peaceful way to address a number of these issues. So we don't have these kinds of confrontations where people are becoming frustrated. We need to avoid that at all costs. And the framers tell us exactly how to do it. And I am sick and tired of these so-called conservative frauds, the pathetic, disreputable John Birch Society, among others, pretending that they stand for the Constitution when obviously they have sold out and they stand for the status quo. Big, intrusive, insatiable government, while pretending to stand for limited government. And same with other phonies out there. If you want a Republican government, I'm not talking about the Republican Party. Republican government, a republic, an American republic. It's time to be counted. It's time to dismiss the knuckleheads and the whack jobs who distort our history, who claim, oh, we support the Constitution. All we need to do is enforce it. How? Well, elect the right people. Really? Like who? Well, we have all these conservatives running. You know, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't Russia's Putin. We have a Congress, we have court system, we have a bureaucracy, and they're entrenched. There is a ruling class. There is an establishment. There are rhinos. There are Marxists. It's the real deal. And I'm sick and tired of the phony talkers. I'm sick and tired of the superficial minds out there. Just elect this one. Just elect that one. We will do our best to elect conservatives. You damn well better believe it. And we are going to be focused on this presidency like a laser. No more squishes, no more excuses. We will support the best conservative. And from my point of view, I said conservative, not whacked out libertarian. But it won't be enough. First of all, we can't win every election. And secondly, one man, one woman cannot reestablish our republic and our Constitution in this post-constitutional period. There are a lot of lessons to be learned about what went on in the desert in Nevada. A lot.